Hello again, this is UML Operator. All right, welcome to part 2 of our Business Process Modeling Notation series, BPMN or BPMN. I'm sorry, I came up with that because I was tired of saying all the acronyms. And we are going to be talking about or starting with BPMN 1.0 and 1.1. I'm going to put them both together. They all happened in the same year. There were some changes, but very, very minor, but we want to talk about them. We want to talk about the what, and we want to talk about the when. For this series, I created 3 models that we're going to be using as we're going across the BPMN versions. And the first one is 1.0. And so this came about sometime in early 2004. It was released. January is what I want to say. They worked on it. 2013, even before that we were hearing. And shortly after, in the same year, I want to say like May or June, it was summertime, 1.1 was released. So when you're looking at the difference between the elements that we have in 1.0 and the toolbox you see here, they made some slight changes to the toolbox. We added BPEL, Business Process Execution Language Process, and we'll talk about that when we get to the examples. And, there's some minor changes in the elements. So when we're looking at the toolbox comparison, I have 2 different instances of SparksUp. You can see that really the only difference in the core is the addition of BPEL, right? And then when you're looking at the types, you can see some other BPMN types were added between 1.0 and 1.1. So we'll briefly touch on those maybe in this session, but I'm going to save talking about these when we get to the examples of both BPMN 1X and BPMN 2. So let's talk about the events first, and then we'll get into the activities, other, and then types. So you can see on the very first column here, I have start, then I have gateway, then I have intermediate events, and then I have end events or termination events, or they're simply called end events. And so when we're looking at 1.0, and I'm going to take 1.1, just kind of drag it just to the right of this. When you're looking at the elements themselves, familiarize yourself with the icons, because you're really going to count on these when you're using BPMN or when you're doing business process modeling. So basically anything that has a none is empty. There's no glyph or icon that's there. So when you're looking at a message event, you see the envelope. So starting message event, intermediate, and then an end message event. Same thing in 1.1. Really no change except for when we got to 1.1, they basically, when you see a dark envelope, it typically means it's an out. And if you see a transparent envelope, whatever color that is, it means it's an in. So you can see, of course, in a start, you have a starting event, and it is in. You could have an ending event, which is starting or triggering another process. And then we'll talk about multiple shortly. So familiarize yourself with the glyphs or the icons that are being used, because they are used more often, especially when you get into BPMN 2 within all the elements. You'll see the scripts that are there. Let's go to BPMN 2 and look at it. You can see that the icons are added to the element, which mean various things. So you've got a receive message event, you have a send message event. Again, look at that, in and out. Just a hint. Hopefully it means that at every time. And then you see in BPMN 2, a major transition really for the better of the BPMN standard. But our focus today is on BPMN 1, and I'm going to go ahead and close 2. All right. So when we're looking at BPMN 0 and we're talking about the starting events that are here, this is what starts the business process at any particular point. So if you look at how we view development, coding, everything is an input, an activity, and an output. Everything we do in life has an input, it has an activity or process, and it has an output. So if you think about it, along the way, we're making decisions. So you have an input, you have an activity, and you have an output. This output could be another activity. This output could be an end event or even an in event, that is starting another process. And we'll explain that a little bit more as we're going through, but I want to explain each one of these elements as brief as I can. I'm not going to go through all of them, but at a high level, we're going to talk about each of these. But first, we're going to talk about the what, all right? So as I talked about in the introduction video, BPMN specification was developed by the Business Process Management Initiative, BPMI, was first released in 2004. So 1.0 came out at the very beginning of 2004 after a lot of work they did before that. And then 1.1 came out shortly after. I want to say something like May or June again. So as a specific language, it was specifically designed for representing business processes and workflows in a standardized manner, all right? And the BPMN elements, as I spoke about here, along with their roles and attributes, are start events, tasks that you see here, gateways, sequence flows, we're going to get into that, end events, then there's sub-processes, we'll get into that, and there are data objects, which we have right here, one example, and then from data objects, we have pools and lanes, all right? So essentially, that's what BPMN is made up of. And as I'm talking about each one of these, I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one of these, from start events to end events over here. We'll talk about intermediate events, and I'll briefly explain those as part of the what before we get to the when you pick which tool or even which version to use in your business process modeling. While you're familiarizing yourself with these elements, it's very important you understand the properties of each one of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to expand the properties window here. And as we're looking at these elements, we're going to, let me move this all the way over here as I'm clicking on each one of these. You'll notice that in the start events, you can see the type is a start event, type is a start event, the type is a start event. And the name, and I happen to give the names of these elements, the name of the event, right? So message is message event and so on, right? So when you're looking at, you have your general, which is your typical Sparks UML properties, right? So you've got an alias, you can put in keywords, you can change the status, proposed, implemented, mandatory, etc., and the version, all right? So let's minimize that. The next one is the tag values or the data relevant to the event. So if you look at the none start event, you have assignments, categories, and you got an ID. Now ID went away or it changed into something else when it went to BPMN 1.1, and I'll show you that in just a moment, right? Then you have implementation, which is unspecified, and if you hit the drop down, it's unspecified, it's a web service or other. And I believe you can define your own. I've never done it. And then you have a linked ID, time cycle, trigger, which is none. Your drop down for your trigger is, it could be a message event, see the types, timer, rule, link, multiple. So you can, if you start with none, you can come in here and you can change when you understand, well, how are we going to start this? Well, in the beginning, I would leave it at none because never choose something if you're not sure, all right? At least 75% sure. Go with none, make some notes, and then come back to it. Or we're going to start, it's going to be started by a message event, or it's on a timer and it's going to go that way. Or the event is driven by rule or rules, right? Etc. Right? So then you've got your trigger, we talked about that. And then triggers, I'll get more into this one as we're going through. You're going to see the evolution. I'll show you that in a moment. Web service, your process reference, your rule name, if rules are applicable, etc. All right. Event, typical properties or metadata that you see within an element. And then you have your project information, all right? Typical across elements and Sparks, right? But the properties that are relevant to the MDG, the model-driven generated implementation here from Sparks on 1.0, these are the properties that you're going to deal with at 1.0, which is simply, it doesn't have 1.0 in here, it has 1.1. Let's look at 1.1. Right, so I have two Spark sessions going, they're side by side. So this is 1.0, you can see by the toolbox, and this is 1.1, right? So when we're looking at the properties for the none start, the empty start, and then we go to 1.1, you can see they're pretty similar. You've got assignment, category, and in this particular case, you see ID was removed, all right? It just evolved into something else. Linked ID, that also went away. And you go from implementation right here into time cycle, time date. Triggers, same thing. You've got your drop down to choose from. Triggers defined. BPMN version. They added this in here so that you could differentiate, especially when we were transforming from our 1.0 models and implementations and inventory or library of elements to 1.1 within the same year. So by the time we got to 2004, we were pretty much all on 1.1. All of our 1.0 stuff had already been transitioned, right? So that was that nice add during that particular point. You've got your web service reference, your signal reference that were added. You have your conditional references and your message references, right? So rule name went away, evolved into something else, and we ended up with these references, and rules are, of course, all the way through the particular implementation. So you see the glyphs right here for 1.0. You see for rule, you have this table, if you will. Look at that conditional table. The glyph for timer didn't change. Multiple evolved into something else. You can see different polygon here for multiple, but message, it pretty much remained the same. Signal you're going to see throughout is this glyph or this icon here as you're going forward. All right. So as we're going to message, you see that really not much changes in the event except for the trigger. So timer is timer, rule is rule, right? And let's go on rule for a second. Let's jump over to 1.1 and go to condition. So you see that the trigger went to conditional. Let's hit the drop down. You can see the choices you have, which are listed here: none, message, timer, multiple, signal, conditional, and link. All right, so you see all of these that are right here. So from 1.1, these are the glyphs that went forward as BPMN was evolving at this particular implementation. So here we're focused on the tooling for just 1.1 for what we just talked about. And your gateways, matter of fact, let me not move too fast here. Let's roll over to gateways and look at how gateways evolved as we were going. So XOR, mathematical reference, basically evolved into exclusive, right? Let me move this, do this. Exclusive was the gateway type. In this particular case, the gateway type is XOR. And if you understand algebra and mathematics in general, you understand what XOR or XOR means, right? And then complex, let's look at complex. Didn't change. OR went to inclusive. So you got XOR, and then you got OR, you got exclusive, and you have inclusive, right? And then and, when you're looking at rules, we're all familiar with this, I hope. We understand that if, then, and, or, what have you, when you're doing your processing, your ands is more than one outcome. So these incomes, these outcomes, this gateway is handling parallel implementations. I want to say at the same time, but as you're looking at various examples, those could be also under timer events and other things that have them running in parallel, but doing different activities, tasks, processes. So what we've talked about so far is the differences between 1.0 and 1.1. So what you've seen here, the differences between these two is relatively minor. 1.1 introduced some clarifications, refinements, and corrections to the initial 1.0 specification within the same year. So it happened pretty fast. A lot of people didn't even notice it. They were coming into BPMN during 1.1 implementation. So there were correction of errors that were made, clarification on certain concepts, symbols, and behaviors, as you've seen, to improve the overall consistency and correctness of the notation. Another one was the enhancement to support data, which was, of course, really critical to me as a data engineer, data analyst, data scientist, which include enhancements to data objects, data stores, data associations. And this allowed us to model data flows and data dependencies more effectively. Another thing was with the alignment with UML standards, especially when BPMN was being handed off by BPMI to OMG, the Open Model Group, that's responsible for UML, the Unified Modeling Language. Sorry for all these acronyms, but what it gave us there was that we could take UML and we could take something like XPDL, which is XML Process Definition Language, as we were working through XMI, which is XML Metadata Interchange, and we were working through our various modeling tools. At the time, and even still today, I use multiple modeling tools, whether they're IBM, RSA, or whether they're other tools that support XPDL or XMI. So when we were using CaseWise, the only way we could import our business processes between CaseWise and something like Sparks or some other XMI supported UML tool was via XPDL. Then there was other clarifications and refinements that supported us with language syntax, semantics, and usage guidelines based on the feedback from the community. So greatly appreciated the very rapid implementation of 1.1 at the same in the same year that BPMN was released in the industry. So let's get to the when to use BPMN. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to close 1.0, probably never talk about it again, except when we get to examples, but I'm going to be focused on examples when we get to 1.1, all right? So you could see that there's a difference between 1.0 and 1.1. Some slight additions. Really, it was BPEL or Business Process Execution Language, which we're going to talk about later in the series, right? But when you're looking at the tooling for what to do in your business process modeling, when to do it is when you're talking with or dealing with non-technical stakeholders. So as a solution architect, enterprise architect, solution engineer, I typically have to face non-technical people and then turn around and have a technical conversation with technical people. And it sometimes can be very difficult. You've got marketing people or very non-technical people, and you're trying to have a conversation. So let's just look at a simple BPMN sample, right? So in this particular case, we have a workflow. And when we're talking with the client, they're just giving us nouns and verbs on how things work. So in this case, customer engages the agent, agent collects customer information, agent looks up customer, all the way through step 10, right? And this is a simple engagement model, and these may be all the nouns and verbs that we get. So now you don't have to do this, and you see me do it in other sessions. My mind automatically highlights nouns and highlights verbs, right? These are the first two things that I'm looking for when I'm reading requirements, scope, methods, and procedures for doing business, right? So in BPMN, the notation that they gave us, which was standardized, said, hey, how does this thing start, right? Then what is the very first thing that's done? Is customer information. So I tend to break my processes up as low as I can go. So in this case, just 3: customer information, case management, and then agent assistant. These are the actors I have: customer, agent, and then an actor is the platform, the case management platform. And then basically we're done. Step 10 is end. But with BPMN, what you can do is, I'm going to double click in this, you can start to bring in pools, and we're going to get more into this model when we get into the sample. We'll fill it out as we're working together, but you can start getting into participants, right? Pools that represent the actors as you're going forward. In case management, you can see we've got a customer relation management platform that the agent is using facing the customer. And then we have a case management for dealing with a knowledge management, case management, the use cases for particular problem solving the agent is doing and supporting the customer, right? And then you have agent assistant. And in this particular case, we've only pulled out one participant, right? And the agent actor is working in the CRM system, could be connected to the particular platform for doing case management. CRM, you can see saying participant and then order management, all right? So this is a very fast and simple way that you can use to model as you're reading or listening to your client stakeholders that are non-technical. All right, so that was the what and the when. In our next session, we're going to get into what and when for business process modeling notation 2.0, 2.x is what I often say. But we learned about the what in one, and we learned about the when, all right? So there's a what and when you're using BPMN 2, but you can see when you're looking at the two specifications that BPMN 2 expands even more, a lot more gateways that are here, certainly a lot more types that we're going to be getting into as we're modeling together. But you can see that there's a difference between what and when on one versus what and when on two. Sometimes I'm not planning on taking this all the way down to actually going from BPMN to execution language, because you can take your BPMN in 2. 1.1 was not as easy, I want to say, but we'll talk about that more as we're going forward. But in 2, you can take your BPMN, whatever BPM engine you're using. I used ActiveOS, known by Informatica, a decade ago or so. And today we use Camunda. There's lots of different platforms out there in the low-code, no-code environment that help you move from model driving your implementation into code delivery, right? And almost in real time, CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. And we'll talk more about that when we get into probably, I want to say part 4, part 5, probably part 5 with BPMN 2 show and tell. We're going to get into some actual modeling, very simple modeling, and we'll talk more about BPEL, all right, at that particular time. I really want to talk about BPEL for people, which was extremely powerful when it was released, but you're going to have to wait to get there. So that'll be in that session. Thank you for spending some time with me here. This is a very important subject. I'm trying to keep it as short as possible. We're going to be going through quite a bit, showing the differences between the various versions as we're moving to BPMN 2. In the next session, we are going to be talking about BPMN tooling. Please leave comments down below, good or bad. Ask questions as we're moving through this series. I'll try to answer them within the series, but I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Until then, guess what? Happy modeling.